The deadline for Brexit is inching closer and concerns are growing over tech investments in London. Steve Ranger is the editor here for ZDNet in the UK. And Steve, let's just start off with, if you would, just kind of tell us where we are in the timeline and the general sentiment at this point over there, what they're feeling.
Okay, so yeah, the Brexit deadline is not inching towards us; it's racing towards us like a galloping horse. We have considerably less than 3 months now to work out the relationship we're going to have with the European Union after we leave, assuming we leave the European Union. So it's a pretty crazy time, really. All sorts of stuff is happening. No one really knows what's going on. And that uncertainty is really, really bad for business. So we have a lot of companies trying to work out how they will be doing business with Europe, whether they can do business with Europe after the end of March. And right now, the situation is extremely unclear and extremely fluid.
And what are people feeling? How is this showing in terms of the investments when we talk about the tech sector? And where do we stand with that?
Okay, sure. It's worth remembering we still haven't actually left the European Union yet. We're in the stage of talking about how we leave. But even now, there's enough kind of uncertainty out there that companies, by the looks of things, are reining back on investment. We've had 2 separate sets of figures come out in the last few weeks that have suggested that last year, tech investment in London and in the UK, that is VC investment in tech companies in either the capital or in the country in general, have dropped. Now, the people who put out the numbers say there's some quite good reasons why that is. I mean, maybe 2017 was a really busy, really high sort of like high tide year, so there's a lot of investment then. 2018 was a little bit quieter, but I think the reality is that this is the start of the Brexit headwinds. Companies are getting a bit more concerned about whether they should invest in London and in the UK, or maybe look at Europe, mainland Europe instead. And in fact, if you look at the numbers for Paris and for Berlin, for France, for Germany, investment there in tech companies is increasing at quite a rapid rate. So it looks like this is not just a kind of a European slowdown. This seems to be a particularly UK and a London thing. It's worth bearing in mind that the UK and London in particular is still the biggest tech hub in Europe. You can add together the German, the Berlin and the Paris numbers, and they only just about reach the same sort of scale as London. So London really is still a powerhouse, but it looks like those European rivals are starting to chip away at that dominance.
And the people that you're talking to there, Steve, what are their main concerns? Just the uncertainty in general, just really not knowing how this is going to go down at this point?
Yeah, so the uncertainty is definitely the biggest thing. Most companies don't like uncertainty. Clearly, there are some companies that thrive on that kind of uncertainty and will probably make good money and find a good business in kind of dealing with that. But most companies want to have a kind of a decent plan ahead of them to know where they're investing, where they're hiring. And so what the people I've been talking to, they've said that they have to assume that a no Brexit deal will happen. That is that the UK will leave Europe with no clear, defined rules about what happens next. In which case, those companies are making plans which involve moving staff or deferring investments. None of these things are particularly positive for the UK and its tech investment, because they're mostly about moving people into Europe rather than moving people into the UK. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty. A lot of companies starting to make those plans, whether it's stockpiling components or moving staff to other European hubs, because they have to make those decisions now. While the country as a whole can avoid a no-deal Brexit right up to the end of March, we can come up with an agreement that works with Europe, and that may well happen. These companies have to act now because they have a long lead time on hiring staff or stockpiling components or opening new offices. So a lot of them are acting now. So regardless of where we end up at the end of March, these companies are already making investment decisions based on the assumption there'll be some sort of no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, and so you kind of touched on that with jobs, Steve, and I know we've talked about this in the past as you've been writing about this, but in terms of the job market, where does that stand? What are people saying about that?
Clearly, it's a very mixed picture, and we're dealing mostly with anecdotes here rather than clear data, because it's too early and that data is pretty hard to find. But I have spoken to companies who said they're finding it harder to find people who want to move to the UK from Europe because they don't really know what their status will be in a few months' time. I've also heard about people who have left the UK in the last couple of years since the referendum vote, again because they weren't clear about what was happening in the UK. I think that's the kind of the probably the most obvious trend at the moment. I think there is another question which needs to be asked, which is, well, regardless of how the UK leaves Europe, assuming it does leave Europe, what do we do about skills after that? So if we're not going to be taking as many skilled staff from Europe as we have in the past, what do we do about generating those skills? In terms of kind of like strengthening our skills base, certainly on this sort of in the IT and technical level, I think there's a lot of work to be done. And at the moment, the government is so focused on trying to work out what happens with Brexit, there isn't much mental power left over for those kinds of things. And it really needs to be, because we really need to work out what we're doing with in terms of skills, reskilling people who haven't got jobs or who aren't in the right place, how you get those people into the places where the jobs are and to get them the skills that they need. That's a huge project. That's a kind of like a multi-decade project, which we really haven't started on yet. So yeah, right now Brexit is causing a lot of questions, creating a lot of questions, but it's also absorbing and using up a lot of the sort of mental bandwidth that we would have to fix some of these problems. So yeah, it's a tricky time ahead.
Yeah, most certainly, Steve. And has anything, surprised you at this point, or is this, if you a year ago, looking ahead to now here within just over 2 months from the actual date, is there anything surprising, or is this kind of what people saw coming with the uncertainty?
Yeah, I think in most respects, this is kind of how we expect this to happen. I don't think anyone would really expect there to be vast amounts of investment or new jobs coming into for example, the London or the UK tech scene right now, because there is so much uncertainty. No one's clear what's going on. So yeah, I think if you were looking for stability and kind of a clear way forward, yeah, I think chances are you expect the situation to be pretty much where we are right now.
Right, right. And any upside? Is there any positive news coming out of this that you can see right now?
Well, I mean, we do absolutely ask that question, and there are, I guess, as I say, there will be some opportunities that come out of Brexit. It's a little hard to see what they are right now. For companies that are building hardware, for example, in the UK, at the moment the pound's really low, so that's good for them in terms of exports. That's great. Whether the small number of upsides that we see right now are enough to outweigh the significant downsides that many businesses see, I think is unlikely. But sure, there will be a few green shoots. Much will depend on the actual deal we come up with Europe, assuming we do leave, which right now is not entirely certain. Much will depend on what that deal looks like in terms of whether there are opportunities for some businesses. For example, selling across border could become easier, could become a lot harder. We're not quite sure. It all depends on the deal which is being hammered out right now.
All right, so many factors involved here, Steve. So many things to consider. Just going forward here in the next short term, in the next couple of weeks, what do you see people doing? Where's the focus at this point?
So I think the focus at this point is really that companies are assuming the worst, that they need to prepare for, put all their contingency plans in place. I don't think anyone would be wise to assume that we would stay in Europe. I think so. Therefore, a lot of companies going with the worst case scenario, there will be some sort of no deal, whether that's a kind of a managed one, which is, or completely unmanaged. So I think a lot of that contingency planning is going on now. How that goes on beyond the end of March, really nobody knows.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're certainly right. It's not inching closer. It is, your analogy is right, that it is the galloping horse charging at us at this point. All right, Steve. Well, we appreciate your insight. As always, continue to follow up with you on Brexit and the impact here in the UK. And for more on Steve's article, be sure to check out ZDNet and Tech Republic.